difference.
hour and 29 minutes versus an hour
Yeah.
and 30.
Got to be specific with this guy.
Yeah.
61 minutes. Ready, set, go. Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to the second show for the Modern Dad Council. Today's episode is, oh crap, I'm a dad. I'm going to be a dad. Or again.
You got the word, Chris, you've got the word be in there. I'm going to a dad.
Oh yeah, that's probably why when I was trying to read it backwards. You can tell this is highly professional. Let me fix that real quick. To be. Why didn't you correct me when it, you know, that's when you scared me when you came on and I jumped. So
Okay.
I have to write the right.
I just heard a big blame thing going on there, but okay.
It's not everybody else's fault.
Tell you as an editor, I can tell you as an editor that missing words are actually the hardest things to spot.
You're right.
Misspellings are easy, typos, but a missing word because your mind just puts it there.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks,
So,
Chase.
Chris, you may want to start again. Sorry about all that. So.
I should have just did a little like line with the word. Here, now I got to sit over here so I cover it up.
No, it's fine now. Now it's fine.
Yeah, it looks good, huh?
Well, except for you being there. Now,
Right.
can you edit
Right.
and put somebody else in your place then?
Even
Along
if
with
I
that word?
my hair, really?
Tommy, he probably could. So.
You could, yeah.
Yeah.
Just it'll be like South Park where my mouth just moves. So,
All right, Mr. Moderator.
Did we start
right,
the show
we gotta get on task here, guys. What's going on?
So start us again.
Okay. So
No, keep this in. No. Come on.
the fun banter part, right? So we're talking about, oh crap, you know, I'm going to be a dad, or I'm going to be a dad again. So like the first question that I'd like to kind of put out for everybody to, you know, what did you think when you found out you were about to have a kid, you know, your first child? And I'll kind of wrap it up. So why don't we lead off with Jay?
Sure. So our first child didn't come along easily. We thought that you know, having a kid might be a pretty easy thing, but for us it took a while. So we were 4 years of trying. So when we found out, it was absolutely euphoric. It was like the best news ever because it had been so many months of disappointment. So when ours wasn't oh crap, it's like finally we're going to be, you know, I'm going to be a dad. It was remarkable. That would be the one thing I would say, remarkable.
Cool. What about you, Thomas? Pfeiffer?
Well, similar to Jay, my ex-wife and I were definitely challenged in the bringing the kid into the world department. And we tried for a couple of years, and then we took a break from it for really about 6 or 7 years, and had sort of resolved that it wasn't going to happen. And then we tried in a different way, and it did happen. So the same euphoria that Jay felt, but also, you know, a couple of other thoughts going through my mind. One, having lost my own father when I was 9, and sort of vowing to be a young dad. Like I wanted to be a young dad because my parents had me when they were 40-ish. So, and then here I was at 38, you know, having my first kid. So there's kind of an irony in that. But and then the other thing was deciding that I was going to be a different kind of father. Not that my dad wasn't present in my life and all of that until he died, but typically in the 1960s and 70s, you know, fathers didn't go to appointments with the moms when the kids, you know, were in utero and things like that. So I made a promise to myself, I'm going to be involved in every step of this process. I want to go to every appointment. I want to see the ultrasounds. I want to be there. I want to be, you know, the modern supportive kind of father going through that process.
Very cool. What about you, Thomas? Tommy? That's how I'm going to differentiate you. Thomas Pfeiffer, Tommy Maloney.
There you go. Well, very similar to both Thomas and Jay. My first wife, actually, we had I can't remember what the technical thing was, but she ended up having it really wasn't a miscarriage. What we had was ended up having to have a legal abortion, I think it was, because our first child wasn't developing. And so to say what word after my son Connor was born, it was probably the word relief, because having to go through that tragedy. And the thing was, I was actually very excited because having parents that had gone through a divorce, I was excited about being a new dad. So with that being said, I was very excited. I was relieved because I was that dad talking to her stomach, and we had named the baby. And so when my son Connor was born, it was a huge relief. It was just I was like so excited to be a dad, and not to discriminate, I was very happy to be a dad of a boy.
Well, talking about when I first found out, it differs a lot from all of you guys. I was really pissed. Yeah, I was like, I wanted to get it taken care of. I knew I really didn't want to be with my son's mother, and so it was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to make this work? And when she said no, I want to keep it, it was like, all right, well, at that point, it was like, okay, what do I have to do now to not put my son, because my number one goal was I did not want to raise a child in two separate households. I grew up in a divorced family, and back when, it wasn't completely uncommon, but like when I was in elementary school, there was only 2 or 3 other kids in my grade or it might even have been the whole school that's families were divorced. So it was rare when I was younger. Now, everybody I know has, been divorced. But I did not want to raise my kid in that environment. So it was more like, okay, crap, how do I piece this together to make this work? And for my kid's sake. And when he was born, that was really like, she had a natural birth. So it was like you saw the head starting to crown, and I was just like, oh, I started bawling. It literally, that moment changed me from the core of who I was, what I wanted out of my life, what my focus and my career and everything was. So that was there was a big switch from when I first found out to when he was actually born. And that 9 months there, while he was developing, I was developing mentally and how I was going to do this and put everything together.
Maybe something that affects us too that we haven't talked about is, what kind of family environment did you come from? So I came from a big Italian family that had a lot of siblings and a lot of cousins, and like kids were like the thing. So, and it was kind of almost expected that, shortly after you get married, then you should be having kids. And in our case, when it took us a little longer, we were almost like the lepers in the family. Like, what's wrong with you guys that, everybody else has already at least started to show the next generation, and here the two of you are without one. And I remember feeling really weird at some family things, like there was something wrong with us. That and talk about stories, and that's part of why we talk about it. What's the modern approach to thinking about kids? How do we shut down all this have to, must, should, and talk about what you want when it comes to kids?
Jay, it's funny you say that, because recently I was giving a presentation, and one of the first things I said was, I never wanted to be a dad, and that stems from my parents, just like most of us these days. Parents who went through a divorce. I didn't want to be a dad. I didn't want to go, and like Chris was talking about, I didn't want to put my kids, my future kids, going through a divorce, and because unfortunately the whole studies show that if you come from a divorce, you're going to end up being divorced, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to be one of those statistics. So I didn't want to have kids. I didn't want to get married. Well, that plan failed. But I, once my son was born, the next step was my former wife And I tell people I don't even remember having this conversation. And the conversation that didn't happen was I was going to be a stay-at-home dad. And my former wife would tell me three things. Number one, you're going to fail at it because you would never babysat. You're an only child, and that, well, you're going to fail at it. But it worked out great, and I'm so blessed that I was able to not only have a son, but be a stay-at-home dad. And so for me, going from the mindset of I never want to have kids to now I'm in a blended family. I have two awesome bonus daughters and my son, and I'm so happy that I didn't actually listen to my younger self.
Brilliant.
Yep. What about you, Thomas? You said you had lost your dad at a young age?
Right. Yeah, he died when I was 9. Actually, you know, for me, when my ex and I first faced this challenge, you know, of maybe not having kids, it was a double whammy. It's like, okay, you lose your dad, and then you lose the potential of being a dad. You know, we persevered and found a way that worked for both of us, because she had issues and I had issues, to bring you know, two boys into the world. So I think I always wanted to be a parent. I always wanted to be a father and to be present in my children's lives in a way that my father was not able to be present in mine, but you know, both because he was a workaholic during, you know, until he died and then after. So that was really important to me to have that experience. I was definitely determined to do it. But I think, you know, when you do encounter the issue, as you were speaking about, Jay, of, you know, you're the couple that isn't able to or is having trouble having kids, people do look at you sort of strangely and like, you know, what is the problem? Or, you know, and then there's the whole set of people who actually decide, you know, they just don't want to have kids, and then they're looked at as really strange in some way. So I think everybody gets to make a personal choice, and having an understanding both of someone, you know, who chooses not to go that route, but particularly having compassion for people who, where what should be the easiest thing in the world, right, is not, is really crucial.
Right on. Yeah, that's, for me, you know, even when my second my second child was born, that was one of those relationships I was planning on ending the relationship, but for me, I wanted to do everything I could to keep at least one of my kids in, you know, a stable household.
Right.
A stable household. So I was willing to do whatever it took to make that relationship work regardless. And in that, just found myself making sacrifice after sacrifice for myself and falling further away from my own happiness. And it was kind of a relief in a way. You know, it hurt and stuff when my wife moved out and, you know, filed for divorce and all that. It kind of hurt, but at the same time, it was just like a weight off my shoulders. Like, finally, I can be myself. I can do the things that I want to do. I was working, you know, in a factory, working night shift, trying to provide for my family, and now I'm, you know, really being able to step into myself and follow my dreams and my passions 15 years later. And I kick myself because it's like, man, and that's what I really hope that this episode does, is helps new dads realize you don't have to make those sacrifices for yourself in order to be a good dad.
Chris, that's such a great point. And in fact, it's the opposite, because what children need is happy, well-adjusted parents. So to the degree that you're making sacrifices and you're living you're living in bitterness or resentment, or you're feeling like, oh, you know, I'm wasting time, or I'm doing these things that really aren't me for my kids. Yes, you're giving your kids maybe a certain benefit, but you're not giving them the benefit of the model of a person who is making, you know, choices that are positive for him. And I think that the happiness of the parent is really critical to the happiness of the child, because you want to teach them that they get to be happy. They're entitled to be happy. They deserve to make the kinds of choices in their own lives that make them happy.
Can I add something that I think Thomas, I totally get where you are. I totally agree with that. Maybe the conversation is even one step before that. That said, what is the motivation on why you're having kids? And is it that you're challenged already in what you want for your own life because everybody around you says you must have them? You know, and not that my family said you had to, but there was this kind of unwritten expectation that we're a big family and big families have big families and this is what holidays are like and this is what we do. And no one said we were weird by not having kids when it took us a while to have them, but we totally felt that. You know, what would it take to shift that story part that we're playing in our heads out and to be okay with whatever that decision is? So, you know, so maybe the question to throw out to modern dads is, what do you think about and what's your decision process on whether to have kids? And so a modern dad obviously presumes that you have kids, but sometimes having those kids means they come along with the person that you fell in love with. And so, Tommy, to your point, that you instantly get a family. And it could be, well, what if I want to be a modern man, but I don't want to be a modern dad? And, you know, how is that not going to, how am I going to play healthy with that in my own mind and not feel like there's something wrong with me or I'm less than society wants?
Yeah, that is such an amazing question, because, you know, we've had a revolution in which women who are not married,
right,
can have kids. You know, they go get a donor, or, you know, they arrange it in some way, and, you know, so we say, okay, a woman who is single gets to have a child, raise that child with a man, without a man, with whatever partner. But the idea of a man, let's say, deciding, well, I want to have a child, or more than one, but I don't want to be married, I don't want to be tied in a relationship, I want to raise this kid or these kids by myself, society is going to react to that very differently.
Imagine.
Than it does to a woman who is now, you know, not in every part of the country, but pretty much liberated to sort of make that choice.
Well, I think that's one of the most powerful parts of this conversation is that, you know, you had that women's liberation movement that we're here and proud and burning bras and everything else, and we just got crumpled. We got stomped upon and put down and you know, stereotyped. And it's like, wait a minute, there may have been a portion of men that were like that, but we're cool with the new society, but we have things that we want.
That's right, and part of that revolution, you know, in terms of women don't need men, sort of almost the consummate expression of it is, well, we don't need men. Well, we don't need we need something that a man gives, but we don't need a partner, a live-in partner, to have a baby.
Right.
So why can't men have that same right if that's, I mean, you know, I suppose you do to the extent that you get married, you have a child, you get divorced, whatever, so then you're saying, you know, I don't need to have this person, this woman, be a part of my life anymore to raise this child. But it's different. I think, and Chris, I think you're right. I think there's so much good that has come out of feminism, but there is a side of it that is man bashing and man stereotyping that needs to be counteracted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chris, I'll add one more because I also bring, you know, the gay perspective here too. So talk about, you know, dads without, you know, so this whole approach. And the only thing I'll share about this, and I know at some point in time maybe this would be a show to have, because I don't doubt that in the modern definition of dad we have to talk about gay couples and what's it like to raise kids where, you know, the issue isn't whether mom's there, it's the issue is that the rest of the world around you has so much to say about who your parents are that it's really hard for a kid sometimes to be in a situation like that. But the one thing I'll share about being a gay dad was when I first came out, I think I shared it with you guys before, that it was this really weird place to be where the gays didn't want you because it wasn't about having kids, and the straight people didn't want you because then you're gay. So there was this middle ground, this middle earth, you know, of, you know, a group of us that we, when I lived up in New England, we found a number of us who were gay dads and hung out with each other because the world says no on all the places that you would go. and we were totally ostracized at the soccer field. We were totally ostracized at the dance recitals and everything else because we just didn't fit anywhere. So and so what I'm glad to see is an expanded definition of what modern dad is. That is, someone who is passionately connected to raising and loving their kids, irrespective of what the loudest voices around them say. And I know maybe at some point we need to get into the conversation of how church or faith affects this, because that's the big stumbling block for a lot of this. But I think it's a bigger discussion that talks about how you love and who you love, and that you should be able to deliver that to your kids and raise your kids that way. And I think that would change everybody if we were more committed to that kind of a perspective instead of a rule-following perspective.
I think you're right, Jay, and I think that part of breaking through that is getting across the idea that a man can teach and instill in a child these same values or traits or characteristics that we think of as coming from women, compassion and empathy and sensitivity and all the things that, stereotypically you would think, oh, well, the kid's going to get more of that from the mom than the dad because women are one way and men are the other way. But, men embody those things as much as women do. Some men do, and men can certainly teach those things and raise children to be empathic and compassionate and sensitive in the same way that a woman can.
I agree with you. Tommy, we didn't mean to cut you out of here. We've been yakking. So.
Did we start the show? I just want to go back to what your original point, Jay, about having kids. And I remember my former wife and I, we had, I don't want to say discussion, it was more of negotiation. And at that time, she wanted to have 2 kids. I wanted 0, so we negotiated to 1. And I think as a modern dad, it has to be where we have communication. We have to, talk to our partner and say, well, I know you want to have kids, I want to have kids, or maybe I don't want to have kids, but let's talk about it beforehand. Like you were saying too, Jay, our kids don't have a choice who their parents are. And so, if you're going to have kids, it's really vital that, you understand that I'm going to be a parent, and I am going to do my best to love them and raise them, no matter what the outcome is. And so for my former wife and I, it came down to negotiation as far as, well, how many kids we're going to have. And so, again, it stems from my own selfishness of being an only child. And I guess it's even funnier in our household these days is because I am still that only child. And when somebody borrows something of mine, the only child mentality comes out going, mine! And I can tell when they've done something and used something of mine. So I guess to coin our new phrase of modern dad, it's the way I kind of put a modern dad is, it's not just your own kids these days. I mean, we all have our own little blended families. So it's kind of, you have to take a step back and go, all right, just be a dad and be I think one of the biggest things too is be a mentor. And I think one of our future shows is, one of my little pet peeves is when people talk about, well, you can't be your kid's friend. You know what? That's going to be another show, and I'm not going to give you my answer right now.
Good. I can't wait to hear that.
Yes.
That's great. And Tommy, the idea of the conversations that we have with a partner before marriage or before going into having kids and all that, and how those conversations are different now,
right,
than they used to be, or they, people didn't have them at all, so, because couples come at it, generally when you link up with somebody, you think you have some of the same or similar ideas. You both want a family, or you both don't want a family, or whatever it is, but bringing those things out, how many kids do we want, or saying to, let's say a man saying to a woman, how would you feel about my staying home? If we have kids, I might want to be the person who stays home. How does that sit with you as a possibility for our future? Or what if we are challenged in that way? How are we going to react to that? You know, what if we end up not being able to have biological children? Will we, you know, would adoption be a possibility, or things like that? You know, some of those conversations, difficult as they are, might be worth having, because a lot of relationships actually break down over that stuff.
True.
Maybe on our next show we can go a little more in depth on those relationships, because we've all been divorced except minus Larry. But I think, you know, Tom brought up a good point. Tommy, you said, how do you keep a normal household as a divorced dad? And I think that's a really great point. But right now it's just kind of like, how do we deal with, you know, the idea of becoming a dad? And this topic, we're already, you know, 25 minutes in, so obviously we can really talk a lot on these subjects, which is great. But for right now, I'd like to get into the dad on the street and kind of see what Larry's thoughts are on about to become a new dad. Okay, so I'm going to screen share with everybody and play that so everybody gets a chance to see that.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. I got to switch my volume.
What's up, guys? This is Larry from the Modern Dad Council, and this week's topic is, oh crap, she's pregnant. So I actually have my wife who's actually doing the interviewing this week, and she's got a couple questions for me. So go ahead, fire away.
What was your initial thought or reaction when you found out we were pregnant with another baby?
My initial thought when I found out we were pregnant was, oh crap! At first. So it was a bit scary at first, I'm not gonna lie. I think that I think when you have a baby, when you find out you have a baby, I mean, no doubt about it, you know, everyone around you is really, really happy, but I think from a guy's point of view, we're happy, but at the same time we are scared to death, and I was no exception to that. So you know, my first reaction was I didn't really know what to think. Didn't really know how to manage it. It was shock, and then after a while, what I noticed was with actually all three kids. I mean, the first one, I was just as scared with the first one as I was the third one. So and obviously the one in between. The thing that I noticed though was that as much as I was scared right in the beginning, over time the fear started to drift a little bit and the excitement started to build. But in the beginning, my initial thought was it was pretty scary.
Okay. What was your fears?
My biggest fears were probably financial. You know, how are we going to support, you know, more than one or two or three? My biggest fear was how was it going to impact the family dynamic? So how was it going to impact, you know, the other kids? How was it going to impact you and I? So our marriage, you know, the stress and the strain of more kids, you know, what would that do to us? You know, how we interacted with each other, if we were able to get out, have date nights. I was also afraid of how it would affect, you know, our intimacy and if we would, you know, have time for each other, quality time for each other. I think that's important to any guy, so that was a concern. But those were definitely my initial fears, no doubt about it.
What was your excitement?
My excitement was definitely growing our family, and I don't think with my first one, I don't think I let myself enjoy him as much as I should have, just because I was such a new dad with the first one. The second one, you know, I got to enjoy him more, but now the third one, it's like I'm really soaking it up this time. I'm not so worried about, you know, am I doing the right thing? You know, is he taking his naps when he needs to? Is he eating when he needs to? all those things that you're so concerned about with the first one. I mean, my main focus is just making sure, we laugh, we love, and we have a good time with them. Because I think in the beginning with the first couple kids, I was more concerned of whether or not I was doing the right job. I guess I should say the right thing, not the right job. But that's really it, guys. So I know that the rest of the Modern Dad Council will be talking about this. So keep looking for us on our next upcoming shows, and thanks for tuning in.
Whoop. I hit play again.
All right, number one, Larry cannot have cut-off shirts.
Dude, I have to show you his Facebook
God.
post for the day. Have you not seen this? I gotta put it out there because I was like, holy smokes, I don't want to mess with him knowing what he looked like. Hold on, it'll take me a minute, but I'll get there. Let the conversation consume while I look this up.
You know,
Go ahead.
one interesting thing is the fear that a new father has, with the first kid, that will I do a good job? And I think mothers have that fear too, but I think fathers in a way have it more because men are sort of stereotyped as not being naturals, that there's stuff we have to learn, that we're not primed to listen to the child in the same way or whatever it is. So, if it's like if you're already tagged as kind of a bumbling idiot, then you're afraid you're going to be the bumbling idiot that
going to live into it.
Is portrayed. And I remember the advice that I think it was one of the nurses gave to my ex-wife, right after she'd had her first child, and my ex was sort of expressing a little bit of nervousness, and the nurse said, do you love this baby? And of course she said yes, and she said, well, then you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So it's really the same for a father. Do you love your child? And is that where you're going to be coming from, a place of love and wanting to care for this individual? Then yeah, we're all gonna mess up a little bit along the way, but if we're coming from the right place, then we're going to do a good job.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's this pressure that we get it right. Particularly so those of us that have more than one kid, our first kids are practice. Everything that we tried to do was so this, and nobody else could touch them when they were little, and sanitize your hands, and everything had to be exactly right. And the second and the third kid, you're like, oh, good, as long as I see your head and you're eating something, I'm fine that it's Cheerios for dinner yet again, but at least I know where you are and you're eating.
Right.
Versus the other one was the balanced strained peas modified with this thing, and the organic this, and then it's like, please. So maybe the modern dad can let some of the requirements that it has to be perfect go away, because there's progress and there's perfection, and perfection will kill you.
Yes.
But the progress that you show up big to it each moment, anytime you can, doing the best that you can, knowing that there are others around you. And Chris, maybe you're right, one of the next shows, or Tommy, one of the next shows on mentoring. How do we connect to those who have done this before so we can accelerate our learning, so we don't have to be so crazy about trying to be so good at it? That we can be good at it and trust our instinct, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, well, I think giving examples, of what is within the range of normal is helpful to people. And I think, as a divorced father, particularly if you have a contentious or not such a great relationship with your ex, you are terrified. Your kid gets a cut, a scratch, something's going to happen. That your child's going to go back. You're going to be judged. How did this happen? Holier than thou, all of that. So I found myself, I've relaxed about it to a degree now that my kids are older, but still, that fear, that's almost sort of, you become sort of overprotective because you're worried of what this other parent who's not a part of your life anymore is going to think of your parenting abilities. And I'm not sure that I can't speak for women, but I'm not sure that mothers worry about that in quite the same way that divorced fathers do.
They have the upper hand.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, there's that same pressure with in-laws, and your own families. So I have 5 siblings. And Italians at that. You can imagine anytime I did anything with my kids, I heard at least 5 perspectives of how this could be, should be, and then you add the other side of the family, which had 6 kids in it too. So there was no shortage of the right way, and maybe the wisdom here is find your own right way, or the same thing about most things. Listen, gather some information, sort through of this what sounds reasonable, and then do the thing that's right for you and your family. And I know I can be cavalier about saying it now, but when I was in the middle of it, being bombarded with ethnic families, my ex-wife's family is from Finland, so I was getting instructions in English and Finnish and Italian and English, and and it was this habitual, you have to, you must, you have to, you must, or something will happen to your child. Well, no. Okay, now that I know that, but I remember going to bed a number of times saying, oh my God, I bet I've killed this child. How could trying to just feed them what I think is right kill the child? Well, this one says you should never eat this, and they should never have honey when they're this age, and okay. All right, someone needs to stop reading so much and just trust your gut.
Right. Go ahead, Tommy. You got something you want to do?
Well, a couple things. One of the things for me, because again, I was an only child, so I never babysat anybody. And now talk about on-the-job training. One of my favorite pictures I have, and I'm actually working on a book called, it's called So, big letter S-O, You Want to Be a Stay-at-Home Dad. And it's a picture of myself changing, I think it was my 2nd diaper ever, of Connor's, and my former wife took this picture, and I love this picture because it is on-the-job training. Thomas, to your point about, if there's a scratch, quick story, when I was going through my divorce and I was living in and out of hotels when I was coming home for the weekends, my son has allergies, and what he had done was he had gotten into his backpack that has all his medicines in it, grabbed his EpiPen, and stabbed his hand.
Oof.
And I'm like freaking out going, I am the world's worst dad right now because I let him grab an EpiPen. So of course we booked over to the emergency care, and who did I have to call? Yes, his mom. So his mom had to come out, and one of the coolest things ever though was, I'm in tears in the corner of this little hospital, the emergency center, going, I am so bad, I am the worst dad ever. And I turned to my son after he was released. I said, if you want to go back home with your mom, that's fine. And he just looked up at me and said, no, Dad, I want to go back with you. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not the world's greatest or the world's worst dad or the world's greatest dad at that point. But all of you guys have some great points, is that when you are in that role of a man/dad, you can do no right, because the moms, not only do they give birth, but they do have that experience that we don't have. And so to be a modern dad, like you were saying, Jay, there's some things we just need to let go and just go with it. Like Bill Cosby and his one of his comedy bits talking about giving the kids chocolate cake. Well, there's eggs, there's flour, there's milk.
Cake for breakfast, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You're hitting all the food groups.
I think that
And they ate.
and then also having a toolbox or a set of answers to people when they throw the judgments or the questions at you, and I found one that was very effective with my mother when she would ask questions, or are you doing this, or how is this affecting the kids or whatever, is sort of, well, that I love them, right? Yes. Do you think that I would intentionally harm them in any way or do something that would be harmful? Well, no. Well, okay, because that's sort of what I'm hearing. That's sort of what this sounds like to me, is that so you kind of handle it delicately, but put it back on the other person when they're applying a judgment to you that doesn't really square with their opinion of you, but it's coming out of their own anxiety over either the safety of your child, or maybe their own anxiety over some other thing completely, but to to build within the modern dad sort of a repository of ways to answer these things when they're thrown at us, I think is important.
Well, maybe that's one of our big purposes in this podcast slash blog or whatever we call the show, that here are some examples of things that if you find a gem that belongs or a new tool that belongs in your toolbox, take it. You don't know when you're going to need it, but if you just tune in and pay attention to some of the things of the lessons of others, then you don't need to read all these books. They just confuse you because they come at you as the definitive source, and there's nothing definitive about this. Well, maybe a couple of things about safety, but virtually everything else is situational. It's experiential. And in the moment that you're doing it is the moment you decide and see, is this working? Yes, keep doing it. Is this not working? Nope, try something else. And if that wisdom, I mean, if we use that wisdom more, I think we'd have a whole lot less people spending their free time in with a counselor, I'm sure I'm paving my kid's road to a really bad future. Well, why would you think that? Or my favorite line that some people say, and my older sister does this to her kids, as they're upset about something, they're like, go get your journal, write in the journal, so when you go get therapy, then you'll be way ahead of the curve and you can just show them what you got.
You already have it in writing.
Yep. So.
Yep. One of the things I did to kind of help me start conversations with my kids is I got this, we went to counseling, and they had us do this, it's called the Ungame. Have you guys ever heard of it?
No.
Okay. Well, what it is, there are these cards, and they have all these little questions and comments to make to start conversation with your kids. Well, what I started to do, I used it a few times, and it was really helpful for some things. What I found is a lot of those cards are focused on negative things, negative actions, negative behaviors, negative, what don't you like about this, what don't you like about that. And for me, I'm like, I stopped using those cards because it was focusing on what was wrong with their day instead of what was great about their day. And so yeah, they come out with these tools and they say, oh, this is a great tool and this is what counselors recommended. But for me, it didn't match up with what the kind of conversations that I wanted to have with my kids. And it was kind of hard for me to put that away because it was like, man, this was recommended, but this isn't following the guidelines of where I want to go in my parenting.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, Chris, but maybe the only wisdom, the best wisdom in that is talk to your kids. And it obviously leads, and everything that's out about positivity, appreciative inquiry, and positivity, by reframing everything that we do changes every conversation. If you ask somebody, what's the best thing that's happened to you today, is a whole lot better than what didn't suck today. One will naturally force the brain to think in a more optimistic and anabolic way, and the other one won't. I love your idea about having a game like that, but maybe that's something we take charge of and say, what would it take to reframe those questions in a more positive or positivity-based mindset, but keep asking, because then the information happens and the conversation happens.
Well, yeah, I think that's kind of the point of the modern dad, is that, there are tools out there, but some of them, like you said, they're a little outdated. So how can we reframe that perspective and that look on things? So, well, I think we hit a lot of really good points on the show today, and I feel that we really helped some people out, and we've started a lot of conversations that are going to lead into some other shows. So, is there anything else that anybody wants to add as kind of a wrap-up to, oh crap, I'm going to be a dad?
Well, I just want to say I am very happy again. I didn't listen to my younger self, and was very happy to have my son Connor, and very, again, so happy that my wife Annie has two fantastic daughters to kind of teach me the girl side of things.
Bonus daughters, I love that.
Thank you.
I'll add a comment. Parenting is one of my favorite things. And I love that we finally get to call it modern. That the stereotypes, particularly in my situation of trying to raise kids in a blended family, in a new kind of blended family, gives me the permission to be a really good dad by calling myself a modern dad. I don't have to live to the same old conventional conservative dictates to show up really big to 3 daughters. And if I were to ask them, how am I as a dad, I think I would be more critical than they would be more critical. And to be able to bring that in a world that still is not quite sure this is okay, and definitely in a family that didn't think this was okay, then I mean, I like that. I'm going to hold on to that modern dad thing. I really like that. I think it's paving the way for us to allow ourselves to show up big and authentic in a world that previously told us not to.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm gonna